In Alaska, did you know the ice roads sometimes give you a second set of tire tracks, even when you're completely alone? Dalton Highway. March 2022. Ice road driver Hank Morrison was running a late haul, pushing through the brutal cold to make his delivery. The cab was a pocket of weary warmth in the endless dark, a small world smelling of stale coffee and the sharp chemical bite of antifreeze. Hank was a veteran of this route, a man whose face was mapped with the fatigue of 1,000 lonely miles. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee, the steam from his breath momentarily fogging the already frosted glass. He rubbed his gloved hands together, the leather creaking softly. The exhaustion was a heavy blanket. But out here, you don't stop, you just keep going. He knew every mile marker, every treacherous curve, every patch of ice that played tricks in the headlights. Driving the Dalton wasn't just a job, it was a conversation with the cold itself, a delicate dance on a frozen ribbon of road. The only sounds were the steady hum of the engine, the hiss of the tires on packed ice, and the occasional soft clink of the trailer chains. Out here, mistakes don't make noise, they don't announce themselves with a bang or a skid, they just disappear. The silence swallows them whole, leaving nothing behind but the whispering wind. Tonight felt no different, just another long, cold drive. That's when the rear camera flickered. It wasn't a glitch, not the usual static you get from a loose connection. The screen went dark for a split second, then came back on with a tiny electronic click. The image it showed was clean, crystal clear. A perfect view of the empty road stretching out behind him into the pitch-black Alaskan night. Hank glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance, but then his eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. He stared at the monitor, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Behind his rig, two parallel tire tracks were forming in the fresh snow. They appeared from nowhere, as if etched into the ice by an invisible vehicle. They were crisp, clean, and ran perfectly parallel to his own. Only they were slightly wider. He scanned the screen, his heart starting to pound against his ribs. The road behind him was completely, utterly empty. Nothing. Just the endless dark and those impossible tracks. A low bass hum, barely audible beneath the engine, began to creep into the cab. His hand, almost by instinct, reached for the CB mic. He keyed it, his voice a low gravelly thing. Anyone on this stretch? The static hissed back for a moment, and then a voice cut through, sharp and immediate. Don't slow down. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a conversation. It was a warning. A cold chill, unrelated to the temperature, snaked down Hank's spine. He hadn't said where he was. He hadn't given a mile marker or a location. Yet the reply came instantly, as if the person on the other end was right there with him, watching. A low humming filled the cab, a strange, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the very air around him. It wasn't the engine, and it wasn't the wind. It was deeper, more penetrating, like the sound of wind blowing across the top of a giant, empty bottle. He reached out and touched the dashboard. It was colder than it should be, a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to absorb the warmth from his glove, and he could feel the faint vibration through the plastic. He glanced down at his instrument cluster. The temperature gauge flickered. For a single, impossible second, the needle jumped from extreme cold all the way to warm, then snapped back just as quickly. A tiny electronic glitch sound, a soft pop, accompanied the jump. Impossible, there was no way the engine could heat and cool that fast. It was another crack in the normal world, another sign that the rules of this road were being rewritten tonight. Then his trailer tugged. It was a gentle pull, not violent, but undeniable. A subtle lurch that made him stiffen in his seat, his hands tightening on the wheel. It felt exactly like another truck had hooked onto his trailer, a soft groan of metal and a faint clink of chains echoing from behind. He was being pulled backward, ever so slightly, by something he couldn't see. His eyes darted back to the rear camera monitor. The shadow was there. It was sliding alongside his trailer, a sliver of perfect darkness against the swirling snow. It was too smooth, too fluid to be another vehicle. There were no headlights, no glint of metal, just a pure, silent shape gliding effortlessly through the storm, keeping perfect pace with his rig. The low hum in the cab deepened, becoming a palpable pressure in his ears. The CB radio clicked once. A voice, no longer sharp but a dry whisper, slithered from the speaker. "We're towing you now." Hank's blood ran cold. The voice was in his cab, intimate and terrifying. He stared at the radio, his mouth dry, his mind reeling. Who was we? What was towing him? Then, on the small LED tablet mounted to his dash, a collision warning flashed. A bright, urgent icon glowed against the dark screen. The system was proximity-based. It only triggered when something with real, physical mass was dangerously close to the truck. He was in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing to hit, but the computer insisted something was there, something big enough to trigger the alarm. Hank didn't brake. He didn't dare. A steady rhythmic beeping began unnervingly like a heartbeat. He risked a glance at his passenger side window, turning his head slowly. For a second, he saw it. A shape ran parallel to his cab, just outside the glass. It was tall and thin, a faint, dark outline against the driving snow. It seemed to glide, moving without the bounce or rhythm of legs. But the moment he tried to focus on it, to make out any detail, it just flattened. It dissolved back into the formless, shifting darkness, as if refusing to be seen. The hum intensified, a constant pressure against his ear. Then he smelled it. Something new, a scent that cut through the coffee and antifreeze. It was sharp, metallic, and vaguely organic. The smell of wet coins, coppery and cold. He inhaled sharply, a wave of nausea washing over him. He swallowed hard, wiping his mouth with the back of his gloved hand. His own breath plumed in front of his face, a thick white cloud in the chilling air. Up ahead, a reflective sign emerged from the swirling snow, caught in the sweep of his headlights, an emergency turnout. The words were blurred, indistinct, but the shape was unmistakable. It was an invitation. A place to stop, to get your bearings, to escape the road. But Hank knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the road wanted him to stop, that whatever was with him wanted him to pull over. The hum in the cab spiked, a screaming in a frequency he could almost hear. He kept his hands locked on the wheel, his gaze fixed forward. He drove right past the turnout, plunging back into the unbroken darkness. As he passed, the CB whispered again, a final, chilling promise. "Stop and we'll finish." For a blessed moment, the rear camera feed froze on an image of the empty road. When it came back to life, the impossible tracks were gone. The road behind him was pristine again, just wind-blown snow. The deep hum in the cab dipped, and for a heartbeat Hank thought it was over. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made him dizzy, washed over him. He had outrun it. But the hum returned, low and menacing. And in his side mirror, he saw a reflection. It wasn't headlights. His trailer lights were reflecting off a smooth, wet black surface moving behind him. It was like a sheet of black ice, impossibly, floating upright in the air. As he watched, the reflection subtly warped and shifted, as if the surface itself was flexing. A faint, wet creaking sound reached him, and a low bass note vibrated through his seat. He didn't stop, not for a single second, until the first pale, gray light of dawn began to bleed over the horizon. He rolled into the company yard in Prudhoe Bay, the engine finally sighing into silence. He stumbled out of the cab, his body shaking uncontrollably, his breath punching out in thick, ragged clouds against the biting morning air. He was safe. Later that morning, the mechanics were doing their post-trip inspection. One of them called him over, pointing to the rear bumper. There, scraped into the grime and ice, was a fresh hitch mark, a deep gouge down to the bright, clean metal, as if a massive, heavy-duty tow hook had latched on with incredible force, and then let go. Hank just stared, silent. Then he saw the tracks. One set leading to his truck was his, but there was another set beside them. Wider, they stopped directly behind his bumper, right where the hitch mark was, and then they continued forward, past his parked rig, and disappeared deeper into the yard. Hank's eyes followed the tracks across the vast, empty lot. Far across the yard, a parked, unhooked trailer rocked gently on its landing gear. Once, a single, deliberate movement in the still, frozen air, accompanied by the faintest metallic creak carried on the wind. Back in his cab, gathering his things, Hank froze. His CB radio clicked one last time. It sat on its hook, untouched. A final sibilant whisper filled the small space. "Next load. Would you drive that road? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching."